What is true desperation? For Eliza Hayes in 1878, it had the shape of 40 sun-baked acres of failure. It was a patch of land so cursed, so utterly devoid of life and hope, that the locals had a name for it: the Graveyard of Dreams. It was the one shack on the one property that nobody in the West wanted. A place where the soil was poison, water was a myth, and the only things that thrived were the buzzards. Everyone told her she was a fool to even unpack her single trunk. They said the land would break her, just as it had broken every man and family before her. They gave her 6 months at most before the desert claimed her too, but what all those pitying eyes couldn't see, and what the ground had guarded for 1,000 years, was the secret lying just 10 feet beneath the dust. The earth was waiting for the one person desperate enough to dig. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching this story from. I'd love to know just how far these exciting stories are reaching. And if you've ever experienced an inexplicable situation, share it with us. The year was 1878. The town of Silver Peak, Nevada was a place of noise and grit. The air was perpetually choked with the gray metallic dust from the stamp mills, a constant thunderous pounding that Eliza Hayes felt in her very bones. It was the sound of progress, the sound of wealth, but also the sound of danger. For 2 years, this sound had been the backdrop to her life with Thomas. Thomas was a man defined by the earth. His hands were never clean, the grime of silver ore permanently etched into his calluses. He was quiet, but his kindness was a palpable thing in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the high desert. Eliza, at 26, had left her well-to-do but stifling family in Boston to follow him, believing in the simple, sturdy life he promised. He worked the deep shafts of the Black Star mine, a place that devoured men and spat out fortunes for others. One cold spring morning, the pounding of the stamp mills stopped. The silence that fell over Silver Peak was sudden, heavy and sickening. It was a silence that every wife in town dreaded more than the noise. A tremor, not from the earth but from within it, had run through the town. A moment later, the mine whistle began its long, mournful shriek. Eliza ran. She didn't bother with a bonnet or shawl. She ran, her heart hammering against her ribs, already knowing what she would find. She joined the silent, pale-faced congregation of women at the mouth of the Black Star. For 3 days they waited. They watched the grim-faced foreman and his crews dig, their lanterns casting ghostly glows on the rubble and the exhausted faces. Hope was a flickering candle flame, easily extinguished. On the 3rd day, the foreman, a man named Brody, stopped digging. He walked over to Eliza, his gaze fixed on the ground. He didn't need to say the words. He simply pressed a dust-caked tin box into her hands. Inside was Thomas's pocket watch, its crystal spider-webbed with cracks and a folded document. A deed. It was for 40 acres in the New Mexico Territory, near a settlement so small it was barely a crossroads, called Dry Fork. Thomas had bought it in secret, writing in his last letters about their escape hatch, a place to farm, to breathe air that wasn't full of pulverized rock, a place to retire when he was done risking his life. When Eliza unfolded the deed, a cold dread replaced her grief. The local name for the plot, scribbled in the margins, was the Graveyard of Dreams. Even in Nevada they knew the place. It was a patch of sun-scorched earth where everything and everyone failed. The soil was sterile, the water non-existent. It was where hope went to be buried. Silver Peak, a town built on speculation, offered only pity. The mining company, absolved of all responsibility, gave her a widow's pittance of $20. The other wives, lost in their own grief or relief, offered solemn looks and platitudes. Eliza was alone. The thought of returning east, a failed widow to her judgmental family, was a different kind of death. She refused. Eliza Hayes, fueled by a grief so profound it had burned away her fear, made a decision. She sold their meager belongings, the cot, the 2 chairs, the cast-iron stove. She kept only a single trunk of clothes, a set of digging tools, and Thomas's broken watch. She used the $20 to buy a one-way ticket on a rickety freight wagon heading south. She wasn't just running from poverty. She was running from the pity, from the whispers, from the life that had been stolen from her. She was running toward the only thing Thomas had left her, a patch of land no one else on earth wanted. The journey south was a descent into a harsher, emptier world. The green of the high desert faded into the stark, sun-bleached browns and reds of the New Mexico territory. When the wagon driver finally pointed to a spot on the horizon and said, "That's it, Dry Fork," Eliza felt her stomach tighten. The property wasn't just desolate, it was an insult. 40 acres of cracked earth, skeletal mesquite and rocks. And in the center, the shack. It was a one-room hovel leaning precariously, its cedar planks bleached silver and peeling, the gaps in the walls stuffed with old rags. It was, without question, the shack nobody wanted. The nearest water was a creek 2 miles away, a muddy, unreliable trickle. That first night, Eliza sat on the dirt floor of the shack, the wind whistling through the planks like a mournful ghost. She clutched Thomas's watch and wept, not for him, but for herself. She was terrified. She had made a terrible mistake, but when the sun rose, its fierce, undeniable light burned away the despair. Eliza was a practical woman, and her survival depended on one thing: water. The 2-mile trek to the creek and back, hauling 2 heavy buckets, took her 3 hours and left her exhausted. It was unsustainable. She had to dig a well. She picked a spot near a low, rocky ridge where the earth seemed to dip. The ground was impossibly hard, a baked, stubborn armor of caliche and stone. For 2 weeks, Eliza labored. Her routine was brutal. Wake before dawn, walk to the creek for the day's drinking water, then return and dig. The sun was a physical weight pressing down on her. Her hands, soft from her life in town, blistered on the first day. By the 3rd, the blisters had broken and bled. By the 10th, they were raw, calloused, and stained. She dug 8 feet. Then 10. Nothing but dry, frustrating, dusty rock. Despair was a constant whispering companion. "Thomas," she would mutter, her voice hoarse, "why did you bring me here to die? What did you see in this forsaken place?" On the morning of the 14th day, she raised the heavy pickaxe over her head, her arms shaking with fatigue, and brought it down with a grunt. Instead of the sharp clank of steel on stone, there was a dull, heavy thud. She struck again. Thud. The tool sank inches into the material. It wasn't rock. It was dense, cool, and oddly plastic. She dropped the pickaxe and fell to her knees, scraping at the hole with her bare, bleeding hands. She pulled out a clump. It was clay, but it wasn't the pale tan or dull gray she was used to. This material was a magnificent, startling deep violet, almost black, and streaked with veins of burnt orange and a startling indigo. It was cool to the touch, a deep, earthy coldness that felt almost alive. It smelled faintly of sulfur and hot iron. There was no water. The well was a failure, but this thing, this beautiful, impossible dirt, it captivated her. Forgetting her thirst, forgetting the heat, she clawed at the seam, filling one of her water buckets with the strange, colorful earth. She hauled it back to the shack, her mind racing. She took a small handful and mixed it with the precious cup of her drinking water. It didn't turn to mud. It dissolved into a smooth, velvety paste, a pigment so rich and vibrant it stained her hands instantly. She spread it on a flat piece of slate. The color was breathtaking. It was the color of a desert sunset, of a thunderhead, of a king's robe. She looked at her hands, stained violet and orange. The ground, in its refusal to give her water, had revealed something else. Something the West, in its endless dust. The failed well became the new center of Eliza's universe. The grueling daily trek for water continued, a constant reminder of her precarious existence. But now it was a chore done with purpose. After fetching her water, she would return to the pit and dig, not for survival, but for this strange, colorful treasure. She realized the clay had 2 properties. First, it was a pigment of unparalleled intensity. Second, when she left a clump to dry in the sun, it baked to the hardness of stone. And when she, in a fit of curiosity, tossed a piece into her small cooking fire. It didn't crack. It vitrified, the colors becoming even deeper. With a faint, glossy sheen, Eliza, a woman of practical education, began to experiment. She built a small, crude kiln from river stones and the rusted-out metal of an abandoned trough she found nearby. Her new routine was a back-breaking cycle. Fetch water, dig clay, shape clay, fire clay. She started with simple things, small bowls, cups, flat tiles. Her hands, once soft, were now the hands of a sculptor and a laborer, strong and permanently stained. The first pots were crude, misshapen, but the color was magic. She used the orange clay as a base and the deep violet as a glaze. The results were unlike anything she had ever seen. This wasn't the dull utilitarian pottery of the West. This was art. Her first attempt to sell them was a failure. She hauled a dozen small pots to the general store in Dry Fork. The store owner, Mr. Silas, a grizzled man who had seen a dozen graveyard settlers come and go, just grunted. "Nice colors, miss," he said, not unkindly. "But folks out here want a bucket that holds water, not a cup to admire. It's pretty, but it ain't useful." Eliza, crestfallen, was packing her pots when another customer, Mrs. Henderson, the wife of a wealthy local rancher, stopped her. Mrs. Henderson was a formidable woman, dressed in fine but practical wool, her eyes sharp. She picked up one of the violet-streaked tiles. "This color," she said, her voice quiet. "It's from the earth?" "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said. "From my land." Mrs. Henderson ignored the pots. "I'm not interested in the pottery. I am interested in the color." "Can you grind it?" "Into a powder. I suppose I could," Eliza stammered. "I'll pay you $1 for a pound of that violet powder. I want it for dyeing cloth. And my husband, he'll want the orange for painting his wagons. It looks durable." That single transaction changed everything. The real treasure wasn't the pots. It was the pigment itself. Eliza's business pivoted. She was no longer a potter. She was a miner. Her new routine was even more laborious. She hauled the heavy clay from the pit. She let it dry. Then, using 2 large flat stones, she began the arduous process of grinding it into a fine, silky powder. The dust was inescapable. It coated her clothes, her face, her shack. She sifted it through cheesecloth, separating the vibrant pigment from the grit. She packaged it in small canvas bags, sewn by hand. Word spread, carried by ranch hands and freight drivers. The Hayes pigment became a curiosity, then a commodity. Ranchers, discovering the orange paint was uniquely resistant to the harsh sun and rain, used it for branding and fences. Women, tired of the drab, faded calicos, paid high prices for the violet dye. Within 6 months, Eliza had moved from survival to a modest, fragile prosperity. She had even paid a man to properly and successfully dig her well, hitting a deep, sweet aquifer. The sound of that water splashing into her bucket was the sound of her first true victory. In the West, prosperity is a magnet for predators. Eliza's unusual success, born from the land everyone else had despised, did not go unnoticed. The tiny shack at the Graveyard of Dreams, once a symbol of failure, was now a source of inexplicable and therefore suspicious wealth. The threat came in the form of Jedediah Thorne. Thorne was a cattle baron from the next territory, a man who had built an empire on ruthless acquisition, broken contracts, and fear. He was a large man who seemed to take up all the air in a room, and he believed that any resource unclaimed by a powerful man was by default his for the taking. The idea of a young widow alone on 40 acres, controlling something valuable, was an offense to his entire worldview. He began his campaign subtly. First, his cowhands began accidentally driving their herds across her property lines, the cattle trampling her small kiln and grazing the sparse vegetation. Eliza rebuilt, her jaw set. Then came the direct approach. Thorne rode up to her shack one afternoon, his massive horse dwarfing her small home. He didn't dismount. "Little lady," he boomed, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Heard you been playing in the dirt. It's a hard life for a woman alone." He gestured to the vast empty land. "I'll take this useless patch off your hands. $50, cash." Eliza, wiping her violet-stained hands on her apron, stepped out. "Mr. Thorne, this land is not for sale. It was my husband's." "Your husband's dead," Thorne sneered, his mask of courtesy vanishing. "And this land is mine. You just don't know it yet. $50 is my only offer. You'd best take it and go back east where you belong." "I am where I belong," Eliza said, her voice shaking but unbroken. "Please leave my property." Thorne laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You'll regret that." He wheeled his horse around and rode off. The conflict escalated. A week later, she awoke to a strange silence. Thorne's men had gone to the creek and dammed the small tributary that fed it. Her creek 2 miles away was now just a ribbon of mud. It was a clear, brutal message. He controlled her water, her life. For 2 days, she was forced to use her well water, a resource she guarded jealously, just to keep going. Eliza, however, was no longer the frightened woman who had arrived months ago. She took her rifle, walked 10 miles upstream and, under the cover of darkness, dismantled the dam. Thorne retaliated. A shipment of 20 pounds of her finest violet pigment, bound for a wealthy textile merchant in Santa Fe, her biggest order yet, was stolen from the freight office in Dry Fork. The freight manager, clearly terrified of Thorne, claimed it must have been lost. That was a loss of income that stung, setting her back weeks. The final escalation came on a moonless night. Eliza awoke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrifying crackle of flames. The corner of her shack was on fire. Thorne's men had ridden by and tossed a torch. Screaming, she grabbed her well bucket and threw water on the flames, her heart pounding with a primal terror. She managed to beat the fire out with her only blanket, leaving a charred, gaping hole in her home. She sat in the smoking ruins, covered in soot, and for a moment she was broken. He was right. She couldn't defend this. It was too much. But as the sun rose, it illuminated the pit. It illuminated the vibrant dust on her hands. This was hers. She had earned it with her blood and sweat. She would not be moved. She repaired the shack, her anger hardening into a cold, sharp resolve. She used her pigment to paint a large sign on her property line. Hayes Vein private property. Trespassers will be shot. She then began setting traps, not to kill, but to warn. Bells on tripwires, and in a moment of grim inspiration, she spread the slippery clay powder on the rocks near her pigment shed, a trap that would leave any thief with a very colorful and very obvious set of violet footprints. The climax arrived a week later. Thorne, enraged by her defiance, rode out with 4 armed men. He wasn't there to offer money. He was there to take Eliza Hayes, he roared, pulling up 20 yards from her door. "You're done. Sign this deed or my men will burn this shack to the ground with you in it." He held up a piece of paper. "The West doesn't reward cleverness, woman. It rewards strength." Eliza stepped out, holding her old rifle. It was trembling, but she held it firm. "This is my land, Thorne. Given to me by my husband, paid for by my work. You will not have it." "Brave words," Thorne sneered, raising his hand to signal his men. "Hold it right there, Thorne." A new voice cut through the tense, dry air, a sound of hoofbeats not from Thorne's men but from the road. Riding toward them was a small posse of 5 or 6 men. At their head was Mr. Silas, the store owner, holding a large buffalo rifle. Beside him was Mrs. Henderson, riding astride like a man, her face set like granite. Thorne's men stopped, surprised. "What is this, Silas?" Thorne growled. "This ain't your business." "You made it my business, Jedediah," Silas called out, his voice steady. "The Hayes vein is the best thing to happen to Dry Fork in a decade. That pigment brings trade. It brings money. And it's hers. This woman," Mrs. Henderson added, her voice clear and carrying, "has done more with 40 acres of graveyard land than you have with 10,000 acres of prime grassland, Thorne. All you do is take. She builds. Eliza's pigment had done more than just make her money. It had connected her to the community. Silas's store was now a major shipping point for her wares. Mrs. Henderson's social standing had risen in Santa Fe thanks to her exclusive access to the vibrant dyes. They saw Eliza not as an outsider, but as an asset. And they knew that if Thorne could bully her off her land, he could bully them off theirs. Thorne looked at Silas, then at the other armed ranchers. He was outnumbered, and more importantly, he was publicly shamed. A bully hates an audience. His face turned a deep mottled red. He stared at Eliza, his eyes full of a hatred that was cold and absolute. "This ain't over," he spat. "So I think it is," Mr. Silas said, cocking his rifle. Thorne yanked his horse's reins, wheeled around, and followed by his men rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and humiliation. He never bothered Eliza again. The immediate crisis was over. But the final resolution came a month later. Mrs. Henderson, using her considerable influence, had paid for a geologist from the U.S. Survey to come from Santa Fe. The man, an educated, bespectacled Easterner, was practically giddy. "My dear Mrs. Hayes," he said, crumbling the violet clay in his hands, "do you have any idea what this is? This is a massive deposit of high-grade volcanic mineral oxides. Iron, manganese, cobalt. It's the result of a unique geothermal event millions of years ago. It's incredibly rare. The colors, they're magnificent." He named the seam officially the Hayes vein, but his greatest contribution was not the name. As he surveyed the land, he looked at Eliza's failed well. "You were close, Mrs. Hayes. You were digging into the caprock of the seam, but based on the strata, if you dig 20 yards to the west, I believe you'll find the deep aquifer that follows the same fault line." She paid 2 of the local ranch hands. They dug, and on the second day they hit water. Not a trickle, but a gush of cold, clear, sweet water. Eliza wept as it splashed over her hands. She had finally, truly conquered the graveyard of dreams. The years were kind to Eliza Hayes. The graveyard of dreams was no more. In its place stood the Hayes Color Works, a thriving, busy compound. The original fire-scarred shack was still there, but it was now her office, surrounded by drying sheds, grinding workshops, and a proper large kiln. She, too, was transformed. No longer the grieving, haunted widow, Eliza was the formidable mistress of the Hayes vein, a respected and powerful figure in the territory. She employed a half-dozen local women, many of them widows or single mothers, paying them fair wages to process the clay, grind the pigments, and manage the accounts. The unique violet and burnt orange colors of the Hayes vein became famous. They were shipped by railroad to artists in San Francisco, textile mills in the East, and even carriage makers in Europe, all of whom prized the pigments for their unparalleled vibrancy and durability. Dry Fork, the dying speck on the map, flourished. It became a trade hub, a small, colorful town built on the foundation of one woman's refusal to fail. Eliza would often, at sunset, walk to the edge of her property and look out over the land that had almost killed her. She would look at her hands, still calloused, but now permanently stained with the beautiful, rich colors of the earth. She thought of Thomas. Had he known somehow what was hidden beneath the dust? Or was it all just a blind, desperate, beautiful accident? She decided it didn't matter. The land nobody wanted had held a secret, and in her darkest hour, when she had nowhere else to turn, the ground had opened up and revealed to her, and only her, exactly what the West had tried so hard to hide. If you found Eliza's journey from widow to proprietor inspiring, please support the stories we bring to you. Subscribe to Old World Whispers, turn on notifications, and share this story with a friend. Your support ensures that the forgotten dramas of American history, the perseverance, the grit, and the incredible discoveries continue to echo across time. Until the next whisper from the past, thank you for watching.